A stretch of water most people couldn't find on a map just became a battlefield in two completely different wars at the same time. American missiles struck Iran's naval headquarters on the Caspian Sea coast, a location Tehran almost certainly assumed was too far removed from the actual fighting to ever come under fire. And within days, an entirely different country's forces hit Iranian vessels in that exact same sea, for reasons that have nothing to do with the war against America at all. Two separate conflicts, thousands of miles apart in their origins, suddenly converging on the one stretch of coastline Iran probably felt safest. Let's start with what actually makes this genuinely unthinkable, because the geography here matters enormously. The Caspian Sea sits along Iran's northern border, landlocked, bordered by Russia, Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, and Azerbaijan, about as far as you can physically get from the Strait of Hormuz, the Persian Gulf, or any of the maritime choke points that have defined this entire war so far. For 5 months, virtually every naval engagement in this conflict has played out in the south, around Hormuz, the Gulf of Oman, the waters near Bahrain and Kuwait. The Caspian coast represented something different entirely, a quiet northern flank, home to trade routes, fishing fleets, and a naval presence Iran likely assumed was operating well outside the boundaries of this particular fight. That assumption just got shattered. According to a security official in Gilan province, quoted by Iranian media, American missiles struck a Revolutionary Guards Navy headquarters in the Ziba Kanar area, directly on the Caspian coast. Provincial authorities in Gilan further confirmed that American projectiles also struck the port city of Bandar Anzali, one of Iran's most significant Caspian Sea harbors. This wasn't an isolated incident either. It came as part of a single, coordinated wave of strikes that hit targets from the far south to the far north of the country almost simultaneously. American airstrikes hit Piranshar in West Azerbaijan province near the Iraqi border. At the same time, missiles were landing on the Caspian coast hundreds of miles away. Read that geographic spread carefully. This wasn't a single contained strike package hitting one region. This was the United States demonstrating, in a single operational window, that it could reach targets scattered across nearly the entire length and breadth of Iranian territory, north to south all at once. Think about what that specific choice actually communicates to Iran's military planners. For months, Iranian naval and military assets, stationed away from the primary southern battle zones, could reasonably assume they existed outside the war's immediate reach, useful as a strategic reserve, a fallback, a place to relocate valuable equipment if things got too hot down south. This strike removes that assumption entirely. If American missiles can reach Revolutionary Guard naval infrastructure on the Caspian Sea, a location about as geographically distant from the primary conflict zone as Iranian territory allows, then no single stretch of the country's coastline, north, south, east, or west, can be treated as genuinely safe anymore. That's not a minor tactical development. That's a fundamental expansion of the operational map this entire war is being fought across. Consider what that expanded map actually means for how Iran has to defend itself going forward. Every additional coastline that becomes a legitimate target forces Iran's already stretched air defense network to cover more ground with the same finite set of resources. A military that could previously concentrate its most capable defenses around the Strait of Hormuz and its southern approaches now has to seriously consider whether its northern infrastructure, its Caspian ports, its naval facilities near the Russian and Azerbaijani borders need that same level of protection too. Spreading defensive coverage that thin across a country this large inevitably creates gaps somewhere, and American planners almost certainly understand that forcing Iran to defend everywhere simultaneously is itself a form of pressure, independent of whatever specific damage any single strike actually causes. Iran's Revolutionary Guard didn't take this particular set of strikes quietly either. In a broader pattern of retaliation playing out around this same window, the Revolutionary Guard said it had significantly damaged a surveillance tower used by the U.S. Fifth Fleet in Bahrain, while Iran's army separately claimed it had struck American military equipment depots at Camp Buehring in northern Kuwait, alongside U.S. troop positions at Camp Arifjan and Camp Doha near Kuwait City. Elsewhere, a missile attack on the Iranian city of Avaz killed 4 people and injured 5, according to Iran's state broadcaster. Every thread of this exchange, American strikes reaching the Caspian coast in the north, Iranian retaliation hitting American positions across the Gulf in the south, represents a war that has fully abandoned any sense of geographic containment, hitting targets across an enormous span of territory within the same rough time frame. But here's where this story takes a turn that almost nobody expected. The twist that makes the word unthinkable apply in an entirely different sense than the American strikes alone. Just days after this exchange, an entirely separate country's military struck Iranian vessels in that exact same body of water, and that country wasn't the United States at all. It was Ukraine. Iran's foreign ministry formally accused Ukraine of attacking an Iranian commercial vessel in the Caspian Sea, an assault that left 1 sailor dead and several others injured. Iran summoned Ukraine's chargé d'affaires in Tehran specifically to protest what its foreign ministry described, in an official statement, as a hostile and criminal act. According to Regional Governor Hadi Hag Shenas, the stricken vessel had been carrying a cargo of iron, sailing along what he called a safe and reliable corridor for commercial exchanges between the ports of Astrakhan in Russia and Anzali in Iran. 3 crew members injured, 1 seafarer killed. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky didn't deny any of it. In fact, he confirmed the operation directly, posting that Ukrainian forces had achieved what he called very strong results with long-range strikes in the Caspian Sea, explicitly including, in his own words, vessels used in military cargo shipments involving Iran, as well as a warship. Read the specific language he chose there. He wasn't describing an accidental or ambiguous strike. He was explicitly framing this as a deliberate operation against Iranian military logistics, tied directly to the broader Russia-Ukraine war, rather than anything happening between Iran and the United States. And that connection is exactly what makes this development so significant, because it reveals something about this entire regional conflict that most casual observers have missed entirely. Russia has, for years, relied heavily on Iranian-designed Shahed drones in its war against Ukraine. Weapons analysts sometimes call the poor man's cruise missile precisely because of how cheaply and effectively they've been used to batter Ukrainian cities and infrastructure. The Caspian Sea has functioned as a critical logistics corridor for exactly this kind of military cooperation between Tehran and Moscow, a route connecting Russian ports like Astrakhan to Iranian ports like Anzali, carrying, according to Ukraine's own account, far more than simple commercial cargo. By striking vessels along this exact corridor, Ukraine wasn't intervening in the Iran-US war at all. It was extending its own separate war against Russia into a supply chain it believes has been quietly arming the very drones falling on Ukrainian cities. This alliance between Tehran and Moscow runs deeper than a single shipping route, too. Iran has reportedly received Russian satellite intelligence in return, information that Ukrainian officials say Moscow has been passing along, specifically to help Iran target its own strikes more effectively within the current Middle East conflict. Zelensky himself pointed directly to this reciprocal arrangement, noting that Kyiv had observed Russia sharing satellite observations of the Middle East with Tehran. If that claim holds up, it means the relationship running through this Caspian corridor isn't simply one-directional, Iranian drones flowing toward Russia, but a genuine two-way exchange of military support, drones and cargo moving one direction, intelligence and targeting data potentially moving the other, all funneled through the exact stretch of water that just came under attack from 2 entirely separate militaries within the same week. So picture what's actually happening in this single body of water right now. On one side, the United States is striking Iranian naval infrastructure on the Caspian coast as part of its broader campaign against Tehran, demonstrating it can reach targets anywhere across Iranian territory. On another, completely separate side, Ukraine is striking Iranian vessels in that exact same sea as an extension of its fight against Russia, treating Iranian shipping there as fair game specifically because of Tehran's role supplying Moscow's drone program. 2 entirely different wars, fought by 2 entirely different sets of combatants, over 2 entirely different grievances, suddenly overlapping in the exact same narrow stretch of water, because Iran itself sits at the intersection of both conflicts simultaneously, a partner to Russia in one war and a target of America and Israel in another. Iran's own reaction captures just how disorienting this convergence has become for Tehran's government. Ukraine's foreign ministry connection to a completely different war caught Iranian officials in an almost impossible diplomatic position, forced to formally protest an attack from a country Iran has no direct conflict with, while simultaneously absorbing American strikes from a war it's fighting on an entirely separate front, both landing in the same geographic space within days of each other. There's a particular kind of strategic exhaustion buried inside that situation, a government having to manage 2 completely unrelated hostile militaries operating in the same waters, unable to fully focus its attention, its air defenses, or its diplomatic energy on either threat without the other capitalizing on that same distraction. Every diplomatic cable Iran's foreign ministry has to draft, protesting Ukraine's actions, is time and attention not spent managing the far more consequential negotiations with Washington. Every additional radar system Iran has to keep monitoring its Caspian coastline is a resource not available to reinforce its southern defenses against the war actually threatening its government's survival. In practical terms, Iran is now paying an attention tax on 2 separate fronts simultaneously, one that didn't exist 5 months ago and one that shows no sign of resolving even during the brief pause in direct American bombing. And all of this is unfolding during a moment that should, on paper, represent a step back from escalation rather than an expansion of it. The U.S. military halted its streak of consecutive nightly strikes against Iran after nearly 2 weeks of continuous bombing, with a Department of Defense source telling reporters that operations were, in their words, on hold. A senior official in the Trump administration explained the pause by saying the president has always preferred diplomacy, but has shown Iran what will happen if it fails to come to the negotiating table seriously. According to the New York Times, Trump had specifically decided, at least for now, to back away from plans to dramatically ramp up attacks on Iran. And yet, even during this exact pause in direct American strikes, the broader war kept expanding anyway. Houthi forces in Yemen struck Saudi Aramco oil facilities in Jizan and Yanbu over the same weekend, sending a column of smoke rising from the refinery, while Ukraine's Caspian operation added an entirely new combatant into the mix from a completely different direction. That timing deserves particular attention because it undercuts any simple narrative suggesting this war is winding down just because the primary combatant paused. The exact days when American bombs stopped falling on Iran were the exact days when Iranian vessels came under fire from an entirely different nation, and Saudi oil infrastructure came under fire from Iran's own regional proxies. A war doesn't actually shrink just because its most visible headline exchange goes quiet for a few nights. It simply reveals, in that quiet, just how many other fronts have already opened up around it, each one operating according to its own logic, its own grievances, and its own timeline, almost entirely independent of whatever calculation led Washington to pause its own campaign. That pattern, direct U.S.-Iran strikes pausing while the broader regional and even international conflict keeps finding fresh fronts to burn through, tells you something important about how difficult this specific war has become to actually contain. It's not simply a bilateral standoff between two governments that can be switched off with a single ceasefire announcement. It has grown tentacles reaching into Yemen's civil war, into Gulf shipping lanes, and now, unmistakably, into the Russia-Ukraine conflict itself, through a shared Caspian Sea corridor that connects Iranian military cooperation with Moscow to Ukrainian retaliation against exactly that cooperation. So when you step back and ask what actually happened to Iran's Caspian fleet, the honest answer involves two completely different stories layered on top of each other. American missiles reached a naval headquarters Iran likely believed was safely removed from the primary battle lines, proving that no corner of the country's coastline remains genuinely out of reach. And separately, in the exact same body of water, Ukrainian forces struck Iranian vessels as part of an entirely different war, one fought over drones and supply chains thousands of miles from Tehran's dispute with Washington. Together, these two attacks reveal something that may end up mattering more than either strike individually, that Iran's alliances and its adversaries have become so tangled across overlapping conflicts that geography itself no longer offers any real protection. A quiet northern sea, chosen specifically because it sat outside the main lines of this war, just proved it was never actually safe at all, struck first by the country Iran is directly fighting, then by a country Iran isn't fighting directly at all, within the same narrow window of days, in the same narrow stretch of water, for two entirely different reasons that somehow arrived at the exact same devastating conclusion.